The silence on the luxury starship Celestial Voyager shattered as Veronica Castell's voice cut through the first-class cabin. The woman's perfectly manicured finger pointed accusingly at the tall black man in military dress uniform who stood in the aisle. "Excuse me, but that seat is taken," she said, her voice dripping with disdain as her eyes moved from his polished boots to his decorated chest and finally to his face. Her gaze lingered on Lieutenant Commander Marcus Wells' military uniform with visible disgust. Marcus remained still, his broad shoulders straight despite the exhaustion that weighed on him after 3 years fighting at the Orient Front. The dark circles under his eyes told of sleepless nights defending Earth's furthest colonies. Without a word, he simply held up his ticket, the holographic first class marking glowing blue in the soft cabin light. "Ma'am, this is my assigned seat," he said quietly, his deep voice controlled and professional despite the long journey home. The other passengers turned to watch the scene unfold. Some lowered their eyes uncomfortably, while others stared openly, curious about the outcome of this confrontation. The first-class cabin of the Celestial Voyager was known for its exclusivity, a place where the wealthy and powerful traveled between worlds in luxury, while ordinary citizens were packed into the economy sections below. Verona's companions, a silver-haired businessman, and a younger woman with cybernetic enhancements gleaming at her temples, exchanged knowing glances. Verona leaned forward in her seat, her designer spacewear rustling with the movement. "I don't care what your ticket says," she whispered, though her voice carried through the cabin with perfect clarity. "My friends and I paid for exclusivity. Your kind doesn't belong here." The pause before kind hung in the air like a poisoned dart. Several passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but no one spoke up. Marcus' jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. In his 15 years of military service, he had faced energy weapons, hostile aliens, and the vacuum of space itself, but the casual cruelty of civilian prejudice still had the power to wound him. A young flight attendant approached, her company smile fixed firmly in place, though her eyes darted nervously between the soldier and the wealthy passenger. The attendant's name badge identified her as Sasha, her 3-month service pin still shiny and new. "Perhaps, sir," she began hesitantly, "we could find you something in economy." She flashed an apologetic look at Marcus before wilting under Verona's stern gaze. "There's a Comfort Plus section that's quite nice," she added lamely. The attendant's suggestion hung in the recycled air of the cabin, a compromise that satisfied no one and reinforced the injustice of the situation. Marcus took a slow, deep breath. He could fight this battle. He could demand to speak to the captain, cite interplanetary travel regulations, make a scene that would embarrass everyone involved. But Marcus was tired, bone-tired from fighting real battles where lives were lost and worlds hung in the balance. This kind of fight, against ignorance and entitlement, seemed suddenly too heavy a burden after everything else. "Fine," he said quietly. The word fell like a stone in the silent cabin. Marcus didn't miss the flash of triumph in Verona's eyes, or the small, satisfied smirk that curved her lipstick-perfect mouth. Sasha's shoulders slumped slightly with relief that the confrontation was ending without escalation. As Marcus gathered his bag from the overhead compartment, his movements were deliberate and controlled. The ribbons and medals on his chest caught the light, tokens of valor and sacrifice now being dismissed to economy class. 3 rows behind, a gray-haired woman in simple civilian clothes observed the entire exchange. Her unremarkable travel outfit gave no hint of her identity, and her lack of obvious augmentations or designer labels made her practically invisible among the first-class passengers. Only her piercing eyes, sharp and analytical, suggested something unusual about her. No one recognized Admiral Elizabeth Chen, the highest-ranking officer in the Alliance fleet. The woman who commanded thousands of ships and millions of personnel sat quietly, watching one of her decorated officers being humiliated. The Admiral's face remained impassive, a skill honed through decades of high-stakes negotiations and military campaigns. Her fingers moved across her personal tablet, making notes without drawing attention. To casual observers, she might have been checking stock prices or planning vacation activities. In reality, she was documenting the incident with military precision. Names, times, exact phrases used. Admiral Chen had risen through the ranks when regulations against discrimination were often ignored. She had fought too hard for too long to see such behavior continue unchallenged. As Marcus turned to follow the attendant toward economy class, he caught the older woman's eye for just a moment. Something in her gaze, a sharpness, a focus, gave him pause, but the connection was brief. Marcus squared his shoulders and walked down the aisle, his head held high despite the whispers that followed him. He had survived war zones. He would survive this indignity. As the door to first class slid shut behind Marcus, Verona settled back into her seat with a satisfied sigh. Finally, some peace, she said to her companions. I thought they had standards on these luxury liners. Admiral Chen's fingers paused over her tablet. She had seen enough. She closed the document she had been composing and checked the passenger manifest. A small smile formed at the corner of her mouth as she stood up, gathering her simple travel bag. The journey to Earth would take 3 days in hyperspace. Plenty of time, the Admiral thought, for a lesson in respect that Verona Castell would never forget. Marcus made his way through the narrow passageways of the celestial Voyager, moving from the gleaming luxury of first class to the practical utility of economy. The difference was striking. Gone were the real wood panels and ambient lighting, replaced by standard metal walls and functional fixtures. As he stepped into the economy cabin, the space opened into rows of seats packed much closer together than in first class. He found his reassigned seat, a window spot that at least offered a view of the stars outside. The seat was noticeably narrower than the one he'd been forced to give up, with thin padding that would make the 3-day journey to Earth considerably less comfortable. He stowed his bag in the overhead compartment and sat down with a sigh, his uniform feeling suddenly conspicuous among the casually dressed economy passengers. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, trying to find his center. He had faced worse, much worse, during his time on the front lines. This was a minor indignity compared to what many of his soldiers had endured. Still, it stung to be treated as less than human after fighting to protect humanity. "Excuse me," a voice said beside him. "Mind if I join you?" Marcus opened his eyes to find the gray-haired woman from first. "You've done remarkable things," she commented as he finished describing a particularly dangerous rescue mission. "Most people don't understand what we sacrifice." Marcus caught the slip immediately. "We?" he asked, studying her more carefully. She smiled mysteriously. Just a figure of speech. Before he could question her further, the ship's communication system pinged softly, indicating an incoming message for Elizabeth. She checked her personal device and frowned slightly. "If you'll excuse me, Commander," she said, rising from her seat. "I need to attend to something. Perhaps we can continue our conversation later." Marcus nodded, watching her walk with purposeful strides toward the rear of the economy cabin. Curious, he thought. Very curious. Meanwhile, in the first-class cabin, Verona Castell was holding court with her companions. The silver-haired businessman, Roland Pierce, CEO of a prominent terraforming company, nodded sympathetically as she spoke. The younger woman with the cybernetic enhancements, Dr. Eliza Sharma, a leading AI researcher, looked less convinced. "The Alliance military has become far too prominent since the war," Verona said, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "They act as if their uniform entitles them to the same privileges as those of us who've actually contributed to society." "That soldier seemed reasonable enough," Dr. Sharma commented mildly. "His record may be quite distinguished." Verona waved a dismissive hand. "These military types are all the same, basic people doing basic jobs. If they were truly exceptional, they'd be in private security or corporate defense, where the real money is." Roland Pierce chuckled. "Not everyone is motivated by profit margins, Verona." "No, some are motivated by power," she replied. "Which is why I don't trust any of them. The sooner we reduce military spending and put those resources toward more beneficial enterprises, the better. As Verona continued her critique of Alliance military policy, neither she nor anyone else in first class noticed the small warning lights that had begun blinking on the bridge control panels several decks away. In the ship's command center, the captain and his crew were becoming increasingly concerned about unusual power fluctuations in the main drive system. The chief engineer frowned at her readings. "Captain, I'm seeing something strange in the quantum stabilizers. The resonance patterns are shifting out of normal parameters." "Containment status?" the captain asked sharply. "Holding for now, but the system is struggling to maintain equilibrium. If this continues, we may need to drop out of hyperspace and run diagnostics." The captain nodded grimly. "Begin Level 2 diagnostic protocols. Alert me immediately if anything changes." As the crew worked to identify the problem, the ship continued its journey through hyperspace, carrying its oblivious passengers, the entitled Verona, the mysterious Elizabeth, and the honorable Marcus, toward a crisis none of them yet suspected. The steady hum of the celestial Voyager's engines suddenly changed pitch, dropping lower before rising to an uncomfortable whine. The cabin lights flickered once, twice, then stabilized at a dimmer setting than before. Passengers exchanged worried glances as the artificial gravity shifted subtly, causing drinks to slosh in their containers. Then the captain's voice crackled over the intercom system, the usual calm professionalism now edged with tension. "Your attention, please, passengers. We're experiencing some technical difficulties with our primary systems. There is no immediate danger, but as a precaution, I must ask, any passengers with deep space engineering experience, please report to the bridge immediately." The message repeated, and murmurs of concern spread through the economy cabin. Marcus was already on his feet before the captain finished speaking, his military training kicking in automatically. Around him, other passengers looked anxiously at one another, but no one else moved to respond to the call. Marcus quickly checked his personal device, running a basic diagnostic of the ship's public systems. The readings concerned him: power fluctuations in multiple sectors, unusual pressure variations in the life support system. This wasn't a minor glitch. Something serious was happening. He made his way to the exit, moving with purpose through the anxious crowd. As he stepped into the main corridor, he found himself walking alongside the gray-haired woman from economy, Elizabeth. She moved with the same purposeful stride, heading toward the bridge. "You have engineering experience?" Marcus asked as they matched pace. "Among other things," she replied cryptically. They approached the security checkpoint that separated the passenger sections from the crew areas. A burly security officer with the Celestial Transport Corporation insignia on his uniform held up a hand. "Bridge access is restricted," he said firmly. "Captain's call was for qualified engineers only." "Lieutenant Commander Marcus Wells, Alliance Military, 4th Fleet," Marcus said, displaying his military ID. "I have extensive experience with XG-7 propulsion systems and emergency protocols." The guard nodded reluctantly and turned to Elizabeth. "And you, ma'am?" Without speaking, she reached into her simple jacket and withdrew a small identification card. The holographic emblem of the Alliance Fleet High Command glimmered as she held it up to the security officer's scanner. The man's eyes widened dramatically as his scanner confirmed the identity. He immediately straightened to attention, his arm halfway to a salute before he caught himself, remembering his civilian position. "Please proceed, Admiral," he said, his voice suddenly respectful as he stepped aside. Marcus stared at the woman beside him, recognition finally clicking into place. "You're Admiral Chen," he whispered in shock. Admiral Elizabeth Chen, Supreme Commander of the Alliance Fleet, the highest-ranking military officer in human space. Her face appeared on recruitment posters and military broadcasts, though usually in full dress uniform with her characteristic stern expression, not as the friendly, gray-haired civilian who had sat beside him in economy. She gave him a brief nod. "And you're the officer who saved the Arcturian delegation," she replied. her voice low. The full report crossed my desk. That quick thinking earned you a commendation. And my attention. Now let's save this ship. They hurried through the restricted corridor toward the bridge, the implications of her presence still spinning through Marcus's mind. Admiral Chen had been watching him, evaluating him, from the moment on the first-class deck. But why? The bridge door slid open to reveal controlled chaos. The captain stood at the central console, surrounded by officers calling out system statuses. Displays showed red warning indicators across multiple ship functions. "Captain," Admiral Chen said, her voice suddenly carrying the full weight of her authority. "Admiral Elizabeth Chen, Alliance Fleet. This is Lieutenant Commander Wells. We're responding to your call for assistance." The captain looked momentarily stunned at finding the highest military officer in the Alliance on his passenger ship, but recovered quickly. "Admiral, we have a serious situation. Our quantum stabilizers are failing, and we're seeing cascading systems failures throughout the ship." "Life support?" Marcus asked immediately. The chief engineer, a woman with streaks of gray in her dark hair, looked up from her console. "Down to 60% efficiency and dropping. At current rates of degradation, we have maybe 2 hours before it becomes critical." Admiral Chen took in the situation with a practiced eye. "Options for emergency landing or rescue?" The navigator spoke up. "We've dropped out of hyperspace, but we're in a dead zone. No habitable planets within range. No Alliance outposts nearby. The nearest help is at least 12 hours away at maximum emergency speed." "Then we fix it ourselves," Marcus said, moving to a secondary engineering console. His fingers flew over the controls, bringing up detailed schematics of the ship's systems. "Give me access to the maintenance subsystems." The chief engineer nodded to the captain, who authorized the access with a quick command. Marcus began running deeper diagnostics, tracing the problem to its source. "The primary coil in the quantum stabilizer has shifted out of alignment," he said after several tense minutes. "The backup systems should have compensated, but there's damage to the secondary control array. I think I can reroute critical functions through tertiary systems, but someone needs to physically reset the junction boxes in Section 12. Admiral Chen was already examining the ship's layout. "That's 4 decks down, near the cargo hold." As they discussed emergency procedures, the bridge door slid open again. Verona Castell strode in, her face flushed with anger. "Captain, I demand to know what's happening," she said, ignoring the tense atmosphere. "The lighting in first class is absolutely unacceptable, and my personal entertainment system keeps shutting down." The captain turned to her with barely concealed frustration. "Ma'am, this is a restricted area. We're dealing with a ship-wide emergency." "Do you know who I am?" Verona asked indignantly. "My father sits on the board of Celestial Transport. I have every right to." Her voice trailed off as she noticed Marcus working at the engineering console. Recognition dawned on her face as she realized the soldier she had humiliated hours earlier was now apparently helping to address the ship's crisis. "What's he doing here?" she asked, her voice suddenly uncertain. Admiral Chen turned to her, her expression coolly professional. "Miss Castell, I presume. Lieutenant Commander Wells is currently trying to save this ship and everyone on it, including you." Verona stood frozen, taking in the scene. The worried crew, the flashing warning lights, and Marcus intensely focused on the engineering systems. For the first time, she seemed to grasp the seriousness of the situation. "The life support systems?" she asked, her voice smaller now. "Failing," Marcus answered without looking up. "I can stabilize them temporarily, but we need to reach the maintenance junction to make permanent repairs." Verona's eyes moved from Marcus to Admiral Chen, noticing the way the crew deferred to the older woman. "And you are?" "Someone who understands the value of every person on this ship," Admiral Chen replied simply. "Now, unless you have deep space engineering experience, I suggest you return to your cabin and allow us to work." Verona remained still, watching as Marcus identified the problem that threatened all their lives. The soldier she had deemed unworthy of sitting near her was now their best hope for survival. She opened her mouth, closed it again, then backed slowly toward the door. "I'll inform the other passengers to remain calm," she said finally, a different tone in her voice. As she left, Marcus looked up from the console. "I've got it. The quantum stabilizer's physical alignment is off by 0.03 degrees. That's enough to create a cascade failure in an older model like this. We need to manually reset it and then recalibrate the entire system." "I'll go," the chief engineer said. "No," Marcus replied. "You're needed here to monitor the systems. I know these XG models. I worked on them during my first deployment. I can make the adjustments faster." The captain nodded. "Do it, Commander." As Marcus prepared to head to the maintenance section, Admiral Chen placed a hand on his shoulder. "Good work, Wells. This is exactly why the uniform deserves respect." He nodded once and hurried from the bridge, fully aware that the lives of everyone aboard now depended on his skills, including the woman who had judged him unworthy of sitting beside her. Marcus moved swiftly through the ship's corridors, following the emergency route to the maintenance junction. The lights flickered as he descended deeper into the vessel's working areas, far from the luxury of the passenger decks. He found the junction box exactly where the schematics had shown it would be, and within minutes he had reset the critical systems. "Bridge, this is Wells," he said into his communicator. "Junction reset complete. Begin system reboot sequence." "Acknowledged, Commander," came the chief engineer's voice. "Initiating reboot now." The lights around him stabilized as power flowed more evenly through the ship's systems. Marcus allowed himself a small smile of satisfaction as he headed back toward the bridge. The immediate crisis appeared to be under control. But when he arrived back at the command center, the atmosphere remained tense. The captain was hunched over the navigation console with Admiral Chen, both studying a star chart with grave expressions. "We've got another problem," the captain announced as Marcus entered. "The power fluctuations knocked us off course before you fixed the stabilizer. We're drifting into Kelvarian territory. Their patrol ships have already detected us." A chill ran down Marcus's spine. The Kelvarians, a species known for their territorial aggression and distrust of humans. The fragile peace between their empire and the Alliance was maintained through strict border agreements and minimal contact. Any unauthorized vessel in their space was considered a potential threat, to be dealt with accordingly. "How long until they intercept?" Admiral Chen asked, her voice calm but serious. The navigation officer checked her readings. "At current speed, 43 minutes. We have 3 patrol vessels approaching from Sector 7. "Can we outrun them?" Marcus asked. The chief engineer shook her head. "Not with our drive system in this condition. We're barely maintaining standard propulsion." Marcus moved to the engineering console, studying the ship schematics again. After a moment of focused analysis, he looked up. "There's a way. We could redirect power through the external sensor array and boost the propulsion system enough to reach Alliance space before they intercept us." "But," the captain prompted, sensing the unspoken complication. "But the power routing modules are on the hull. Someone would need to recalibrate the external array manually," Marcus explained. "It requires a spacewalk." The captain frowned deeply. "That's too dangerous in our current condition. The ship's stabilization isn't fully restored. Whoever goes out there would face extreme risk." A heavy silence fell over the bridge as the implications became clear. Without this desperate measure, they would be intercepted by Kelvarian patrol ships within the hour. The best outcome would be detention and diplomatic incidents. The worst could mean conflict. "I'll do it," Marcus said firmly, breaking the silence. All eyes turned to him. "Commander, the risk is—" the captain began. "Acceptable," Marcus finished. "I've done emergency repairs in worse conditions. During the Battle of Proxima, my team had to realign a cruiser's shield array while under enemy fire." Admiral Chen studied him carefully, then nodded once. He's qualified, and we're running out of options." The captain hesitated, then sighed. "All right, Chief, prepare an EVA suit for the commander. Navigation, plot us the fastest route to Alliance space once we have full power restored." The bridge erupted into focused activity as crew members prepared for the desperate maneuver. As Marcus turned to leave for the airlock, he found his path blocked by Verona Castell. She had returned to the bridge and stood listening from near the entrance. Her perfect composure had slipped, replaced by a troubled expression. "You're going out there?" she asked, her voice lacking its earlier arrogance. "Into open space." Marcus nodded. "The ship needs repairs that can only be done from outside." Verona's eyes dropped briefly before meeting his again. "Why are you helping us? After how I treated you?" The question hung between them, heavy with the weight of her earlier behavior. Marcus could have responded with anger or righteous indignation. Instead, his expression remained steady, his eyes reflecting not resentment but purpose. "Because it's my job," he answered simply. "Everyone on this ship deserves to get home safely." Verona opened her mouth as if to say more, but Admiral Chen approached. "Commander, we need to move quickly. I'll guide you through the procedure from the communication station." Marcus nodded and continued toward the airlock. As he suited up in the cramped preparation chamber, he ran through the repair sequence in his mind. The external array was located on the ship's upper hull, exposed to the void of space. He would have approximately 20 minutes of oxygen for a repair that should take 15. Not much room for error. "Com check, Commander," came Admiral Chen's voice through his helmet. "Reading you clearly, Admiral," he replied. "I'll be monitoring your progress and guiding you through each step. The Kelvarian ships have increased speed. Time is critical." The airlock cycled, and Marcus stepped into the void. The transition from the ship's artificial gravity to weightlessness was always disorienting, but his training took over. He secured his tether and activated his magnetic boots, anchoring himself to the hull. The vastness of space spread around him, endless black dotted with the cold fire of distant stars. Below his feet, the metal skin of the celestial Voyager curved away, its running lights dimmed due to the power conservation measures. "Beginning approach to the sensor array," Marcus reported, carefully making his way across the hull. From the bridge viewports, passengers and crew watched the tiny figure of the suited astronaut moving methodically across the ship's exterior. On the main screen, 3 red dots marked the approaching Kelvarian patrol vessels, their distance shrinking with each passing minute. Marcus reached the array and began the delicate work of recalibrating the power routing modules. His gloved fingers moved with practiced precision. Despite the bulky EVA suit, the extreme cold of space began to seep through his thermal protection, numbing his fingertips. 70% complete, he reported, his breath visible inside his helmet. "Rerouting power conduits now." "Good work, Commander," Admiral Chen responded. "Kelvarian vessels now 30 minutes out. They're hailing us with warnings to leave their territory." Marcus increased his pace, aware that every second counted. The final connections were the most delicate, requiring him to remove a panel and manipulate tiny control rods with increasingly numb fingers. "Almost there," he said, his voice tight with concentration. "Final calibration sequence." His words cut off as the ship suddenly lurched beneath him. The temporary stabilizers had fluctuated, causing an unexpected shift in the vessel's orientation. Marcus's magnetic boots lost contact with the hull for a critical moment. His body lifted away from the ship's surface as inertia carried him outward. He reached desperately for his safety tether, but his cold fingers slipped on the line. "Commander." Admiral Chen's voice rang with alarm in his helmet. Marcus watched in horror as the ship began to drift away from him. His momentum had carried him several meters from the hull, and without a direct connection, his suit thrusters would have limited effect against the void's pull. "I've lost contact with the hull," he reported, fighting to keep his voice calm. "Drifting away from the ship at approximately 1 meter per second." On the bridge, A gasp went up as the external cameras showed Marcus floating free, the distance between him and safety growing with each heartbeat. The captain turned to the emergency protocols while Admiral Chen remained focused on the communications link. "Use your emergency thrusters," she ordered. "Short, controlled bursts." "Attempting now," Marcus replied. He activated the small propulsion units on his suit, but the cold had affected their performance. The thrust was weaker than expected, slowing but not reversing his drift. As the vast emptiness of space beckoned around him, Marcus made rapid calculations. He had enough oxygen for another 14 minutes. The ship was now 5 meters away and growing more distant by the second. The Kelvarian patrol ships were closing in, and he still needed to complete the array calibration, or no one on the Celestial Voyager would make it home. Marcus floated in the void, watching the Celestial Voyager drift further away. His breath created small clouds inside his helmet as he forced himself to think clearly despite the growing panic. The cold had numbed his fingers, making the suit controls difficult to manage. But he still had one option left. "Bridge, I'm going to use the emergency propulsion at maximum burst," he said, his voice steady despite the dire situation. "Commander, that's extremely risky," Admiral Chen replied. "The force could damage your suit's seals." "No choice, Admiral," Marcus answered. "I need to get back to finish the repairs, or we all face the Kelvarians." Without waiting for further discussion, Marcus rotated his body using the small orientation thrusters, positioning himself for maximum efficiency. He took a deep breath, braced himself, and activated the emergency propulsion system at full power. The force slammed into him like a physical blow as the suit rockets fired. He shot toward the ship, the distance closing rapidly, too rapidly. He was approaching too fast, with too little control. "Brace for impact," he warned through clenched teeth. Marcus hit the hull hard, his left leg striking the protruding sensor node. Pain exploded through his thigh as he desperately grabbed for a maintenance handhold. His gloved fingers caught the metal bar, stopping his bounce that would have sent him back into space. "I'm on the hull," he gasped, the pain making it difficult to speak. "Leg injury, but I can continue." Using his magnetic boots and the handholds, Marcus dragged himself back to the sensor array, leaving a smear of blood inside his suit leg. He could feel the warm wetness spreading, but pushed the pain aside. The mission came first, always had. With trembling hands, he resumed work on the calibration, connecting the final circuits and rerouting the power conduits. Each movement sent fresh waves of agony through his injured leg, but he continued with grim determination. "Final connections complete," he reported. "Activating the new power configuration now." He pressed the sequence of controls that would redirect the ship's power. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then the lights along the hull brightened as energy surged through newly opened pathways. "Power levels rising to 85%, came the chief engineer's excited voice. "Drive systems responding. We have full propulsion capability." The ship's engines roared to life beneath Marcus, the vibration traveling through the hull to his magnetic boots. A cheer could be heard over his comlink as the bridge crew celebrated the successful repair. "Get back inside, Commander," Admiral Chen ordered. "We're initiating acceleration in 30 seconds." Marcus began his painful journey back to the airlock, each step sending fresh pain through his injured leg. As he reached safety and the outer doors sealed behind him, he finally allowed himself to slump against the wall. The adrenaline that had kept him going began to fade, leaving him shaking with cold and pain. As the airlock repressurized, he could feel the ship accelerating, pushing away from Kelvarian space and back toward the safety of Alliance territory. By the time the inner door opened, medical personnel were waiting with a stretcher. "The Kelvarians?" he asked as they helped him remove his helmet. "Falling behind," one of the medics answered. "We'll be in Alliance space before they can intercept us." Relief washed over Marcus as they carefully removed his suit, revealing the deep gash in his left thigh. The ship's doctor applied emergency treatment, as they transported him to the medical bay, murmuring about torn muscles and possible nerve damage. Hours later, Marcus lay in the recovery bed, his leg bandaged and repaired with the ship's medical technology. The doctor had assured him there would be no permanent damage, though he would need physical therapy once they reached Earth. The pain medications made him drowsy, but he fought to stay alert as Admiral Chen visited to debrief him on the mission's outcome. The Kelvarians sent a formal protest, but they've backed off now that we're in Alliance space, she informed him. We'll dock at Earth Station in approximately 6 hours. Thank you, Admiral, Marcus said. I'm just glad everyone is safe. The medical bay door slid open, interrupting their conversation. Verona Castell stood in the doorway, hesitating before stepping inside. Her usual perfect appearance had slipped, her hair slightly disheveled, her expression troubled. May I speak with the commander? She asked, her voice softer than before. Admiral Chen looked to Marcus, who nodded slightly. She rose from her chair. I'll check on our arrival preparations, she said, leaving them alone. Verona approached the bed slowly, her eyes taking in the bandages on Marcus's leg and the medical equipment surrounding him. For a long moment, she simply stood there, seemingly unsure how to begin. You saved us, she finally said. You saved all of us, even after. Especially after how I treated you. Marcus remained silent, watching her struggle with her words. I came to apologize, she continued, tears welling in her eyes. I was wrong about you, about everything. She looked down at her hands, which trembled slightly. All my life, I've judged people by the wrong standards, by their clothes, their status, their connections. I never stopped to consider character or courage. A tear slipped down her cheek. Today I watched you drift into space, willing to die for people who didn't even treat you with basic respect, including me. It's what we do, Marcus said simply. It's what the uniform means. I know that now, she whispered. Thank you doesn't begin to cover it, but thank you. She wiped away her tears and straightened her shoulders. I'll let you rest, but I wanted you to know that I see you now. I really see you. 6 hours later, the Celestial Voyager docked smoothly at Earth Station. A formal reception awaited the ship that had narrowly averted an international incident. Marcus, supported by a medical cane, but insisting on standing unaided, joined the captain and Admiral Chen on the main deck as the passengers prepared to disembark. Admiral Chen stepped forward to address the gathered crowd. Before we part ways, I want to acknowledge what happened on this journey. Today you witnessed true heroism. Lieutenant Commander Wells' actions have saved hundreds of lives before. In classified missions, I can now reveal. She proceeded to share details of Marcus's previous acts of bravery, the Proxima evacuation, the Arcturian diplomatic rescue, the defense of outpost stations against overwhelming odds. With each revelation, the passengers' expressions shifted from interest to awe. This is what the Alliance military represents, the Admiral concluded. Not just weapons or uniforms, but dedication to protecting every human life, regardless of who they are or how they might treat us in return. As the passengers began to disembark, a scene unfolded near the first-class shuttle entrance. Verona Castell, waiting in the priority boarding line, noticed a young soldier in uniform standing patiently in the general boarding area. He couldn't have been more than 20, his uniform crisp but lacking the decorations of a veteran. Without hesitation, Verona approached him. "Excuse me, soldier," she said, causing him to look up in surprise. "Mom," he responded, standing straighter. "Please, take my first-class seat," she said, extending her priority boarding pass to him. "It would be my honor." The young man looked confused. "I couldn't possibly." "I insist," Verona said firmly. "Someone recently taught me about what that uniform really means. The least I can do is offer you a comfortable seat on your journey home." From a distance, Marcus and Admiral Chen watched the exchange. The young soldier, overwhelmed by the gesture, finally accepted the boarding pass with a grateful nod. Verona smiled, Not her practiced social smile, but something genuine and new. People can change, Admiral Chen remarked quietly. Sometimes, they just need the right example. Marcus leaned slightly on his cane, a thoughtful expression on his face. That's why we serve, he replied. Not just to protect their lives, but to protect their chance to become better. As the shuttle doors closed and the passengers departed for Earth, Marcus gazed out at the stars visible through the station's vast observation windows. The same stars he had nearly died among hours before now seemed to shine with renewed purpose. Beyond them lay countless worlds, countless people, some kind, some cruel, some simply unaware of the sacrifices made on their behalf. But today, at least one person had truly seen. And that made all the difference.